Hi, friends. Welcome back to the podcast, the show where we talk about building a business that actually aligns with your life, not the other way around. In today's episode, I'm excited to share that I'm talking with Cheryl Heller, a former corporate CFO who left the traditional path to build a fractional CFO and strategic advisory practice where she serves startups and small businesses. What I love about this conversation is that it's not just about the work, it's about the shift in identity that happens when you step out of your corporate role and start defining success on your own terms. Cheryl and I get into so many topics that I know will resonate if you're in that in-between stage, thinking about leaving your job, or maybe you've already started your own consulting or fractional business. We talk about the power of relationships and how her first clients came from her existing network, what the term fractional really means and how it's different from part-time or consulting, how to set boundaries and protect your energy as a service-based entrepreneur, and what it looks like to design a portfolio career, one that gives you both flexibility and fulfillment. What I love most about Cheryl is her honesty. She doesn't sugarcoat the transition, but she also shows how much joy and freedom can come from choosing a more intentional way to work. So, if you've ever wondered whether your skills could translate into a business of your own, or you're craving more control over your time and your energy, this episode is going to hit home. Let's dive into my conversation with Cheryl Heller. Welcome to Scale with Clarity, the podcast for entrepreneurs who are building a business and a life that actually feels good. I'm Brooke Cunninger, fractional CFO, strategist, and mom of three, and I've learned that scaling isn't just about hitting revenue milestones. It's about finding alignment between your big vision and your everyday reality. Each week, you'll hear honest conversations with founders who are redefining success on their own terms. We'll talk about the pivots, the aha moments, and the tough decisions behind the scenes, plus the surprising ways entrepreneurship becomes the greatest personal growth journey of all. Whether you're dreaming of leaving corporate, navigating the messy middle, or trying to grow without burning out, this show is here to help you scale with more clarity, confidence, and ease. Because building a business should expand you, not deplete you. Let's scale with clarity together. Hi, Cheryl. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to talk to you.
I told you before, well, actually we've been recording, but I told you how excited I was to have you because I met you in a community, which we can get to, but you were one of the first people I met that I heard this term fractional CFO and I had started using it myself, but to see that there was a whole world of others, I wasn't alone in what people were building. And what I found was the biggest thing was community of people doing similar things. So you and I met, I think it was, God, it's been over a year now, maybe?
I was going to say 2 years, maybe.
Is it 2 years?
Yeah.
See, this is when people say, how long since you left corporate? I'm like, oh my God, it's been 4 years, but it feels like 3 months. So can you introduce yourself first and just let everyone know your name, kind of what you're doing now? And then I want to go back and just hear your story from the beginning.
My name is Cheryl Heller, and I have a consulting firm, and I do fractional CFO and strategic advisory for startups and small businesses. I love working with the startup stage business. There's pros and cons, because people are so excited about what they're putting out into the world, and a lot of times they just don't have any idea about the finances, and so they just want the help and want the advice, and so it's really a lot of hands-on, getting in there, helping them to build their business and get their vision out into the world. The downside with startups is that they run out of money. So it's almost like this constant business development churn, because not everything always works the way they think it's going to.
Well, I think you are similar to me. I know, actually, because we've talked about this. You start working with a client, and it's not just business to you, right? I mean, it's you build a relationship and you want them to succeed and you're excited about the product that they're putting out there. But for me, one of the biggest learnings has been those boundaries between wanting to help and sticking with it. And obviously, any business at the start is at a loss. They're investing in themselves. It's hard to just all of a sudden be at a profit. But at what point and who do you help and for how long, until it's well, you have to invest in yourself too. You are running a business.
Yeah. And it's this fine line, right? Because it's not only, investing in ourselves and making sure that we're getting paid for the work that we're doing and the time that we're spending.
Yeah.
But it's also at what point what is that tipping point where, you start to get into these gray areas where when the business isn't going well and protecting yourself, not
Yeah.
just from a getting paid for your time, but from a risk management perspective. And that's so hard because, you do get, or at least I do with my clients, get very sort of emotionally
Yeah.
attached to what they're doing. And I really want to help them succeed. But
Yep.
then on the other hand, I have to make sure that I'm protecting myself and my business from the downside.
Absolutely. I even had a client just reach out. She's been at a loss, honestly, since I've been working with her, and we were doing projections, and I think there's so much potential. But one of the things too is there's almost a value in what we bring. And if there's consistent, if they're not taking the advice and the feedback that you're giving and they are running at a loss too, it, like my natural thing is I just want to help them and continue to do that. And I have to start thinking like, well, I'm not sure that honestly, like you said, there's a risk management, but I don't think that I'm the one that can help you because
Mhm.
it's not going on the path that you need it to. And actually, I don't want you to keep paying me when you're at a loss anyways, when it's not. And so it's been this hard thing because biz, wanting to help people, but then also running the business is very different than say when I was at corporate, because you take whatever, at least I took what was the work that was given and you want to take, but it didn't have
Mhm.
to have a monetary return. I mean, certainly it did from the public companies that I worked with, but
Right.
in my world within that company, that wasn't the thought that would come. And so this feels it makes me think transactionally when it's not natural. But to your point, there is the broader context about like, actually, it's what's best for them too, is kind
Mhm.
of either stepping away or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But
Well, and I think, and the other thing that's so important, especially going back to the fractional concept, right?
yeah,
Like you're only there for a few hours a week or a few hours a month. And so you're not running the business. And so you can give them advice all day long, but you
yeah,
can't run the business for them. And if they're not going to run the business in a way that is effective and efficient and, making strides
yeah,
forward, then there's nothing you can do. And I always, like when I was in corporate, right? Like there's a lot different, like if you're full time and you're fully invested, you're taking on a lot more. And sure, you can, step out and do a lot of other things. But if you're only fractional, like, I had one client, I was only about, 5 hours a week.
yeah,
There's, a whole week and a half that, they needed to run the business and make their product and make their sales. And if they
yeah,
couldn't do that, right, then there's nothing that I could do about it to make the
no,
business succeed. And I had
yeah.
to, that's a real mindset thing that I had to get over because it's not like I could like muscle it through and make the business succeed without
It's
them doing their part.
it's so good. It's so right too, and that's been one of the big also like mindset shifts because it was probably part of my people pleasing and perfections, but in corporate, I would just take it on and be like, let me do it, which is not a good management trait either. Certainly realize that,
Right.
like training others and delegating, but you literally can't, to your point, because you're not there. So if something's going
Hmm.
wrong, you can't just give it to me and let me do it, because that's the path to burnout, because then you're on one client that you're not charging enough for, like you're spending
Right.
all your time. But it's just that especially I think analytical thinking brains as yours and I are, like you want to problem solve and
Yeah.
just let me just dig in there. And it's
Yeah.
real mindset shift to say, where do you draw the
Yeah.
line and when? Both
Hmm.
for self-preservation, but also for the client's needs as well. Um,
Exactly.
can I ask you, okay, so can we
Yeah.
take it back? So before you became a fractional CFO,
Hmm.
can you talk a little bit about what your background or what your path was prior to making the switch?
Yeah. So, many years ago, I started in public accounting and did that for a few years. And my specialty there was tax.
Mm,
So I did a lot of tax returns and then went in house at a large financial institution, started in the tax department, but then kind of moved into a lot of areas, spent 20 years there. And so I did a lot of different things
okay.
and did mergers and acquisitions, did acquisition integration, did large scale project management, and ultimately was a CFO for one of the divisions. And after a few years, it wasn't the thing that I loved doing. I loved
Hmm.
solving the problems, but in a large company like that, yes, there are problems to solve, but a lot of it is sort of reporting
Yeah.
and, administrative, like keeping up with all the filings and all of that sort of thing. And so when I got the opportunity to leave, a lot of the folks that I worked very closely with were also leaving the company. And so I was like, yeah, I think it's just time for me to move on.
Yeah.
And I knew I didn't want to go back into a big corporate job right away. But I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. And so I said, I just need a little bit of a detox period. Like it had
Yeah.
been a hard few years and I just needed some space to breathe. And always knew I wanted to do some real estate investing. So I started focusing on that for a little bit and then started getting calls from, friends or former colleagues saying, hey, I'm doing this startup thing, or I'm at this small company and we need some help. Can you come, work with us for a little bit? And so that's how I started on this fractional thing because back then, so I've been doing it about 7 or 8 years now. And I don't really even think fractional existed then in the
I,
way
I,
that it does today.
I want to, yes. So pause there because I want to dive into that too. But for your story, this is actually what I hear from a lot of people, except for now. It's becoming more of a conversation. I think
Mhm.
a variety of things, which we can get to macroeconomically, that's driving more of the fractional work. But you, you didn't, that wasn't necessarily the plan. You kind of were in, I don't want to say burnout, but just like, I need a break. I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I need to step away. And
Yeah.
stumbling into it's the wrong word, but unbeknownst to you, there's this demand for your services that you maybe
Yeah.
couldn't have even envisioned before you left of who
Exactly.
needed it and what. Did people just know you had left? So you kind of put it out there, or like just with your existing network from having worked with many people, obviously, is that how they knew or started to come to you? How did those first like reach outs even happen? Do
Yeah.
you
I mean,
remember?
I don't even know. Well, one person was a former colleague that I had worked with. So she knew that I left. She left as well. She was at a smaller company and she wanted to put some similar infrastructure to what we had had when we worked together. And so she said, hey, can you come here and do a 6 month, project?
Yeah.
So that was more of like a true consulting assignment as opposed to
Yeah.
fractional. And so at the same time, while I was doing that, I guess other contacts just sort of knew that I wasn't working full time any longer. And so, it just sort of happened that way.
Like word of mouth.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love your story and you obviously are amazing, but I also want to just everyone listening, I don't think that not, I don't think that is not unique. I think we often underestimate what we've given to a specific company and we think linearly in like that exact
Hmm.
title, like how can I bring it to the next company? But if you really break down the micro tasks that you've had to do and a variety of things, there are so many small, you work with startups specifically, so in that
Yep.
regard, but also small businesses without the fast growth on them that
Yeah.
need such a micro version of us and can't afford the full. But there is, I think that I didn't connect those two dots, even though having grown up with parents that were small business owners, that there is such a need. So I love that people kind of reached out. And what I want to, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we underestimate the power of our existing network, especially when we've been working in corporate for, 20 plus years,
Hmm.
that people have left throughout there, gone to different businesses and companies. And in fact, even the company that I was working at, we were bringing in part-time people or just project-based or lots of consultants. And so when you think about it the opposite way, it doesn't have to be the McKinseys or the PwCs or when you traditionally think, especially
Yep.
in the finance world, it can be individuals that will fill in
Hmm.
these really kind of specific roles we need. And your existing network is full of the people you've already proven yourself to. Forget having to market or brand yourself. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. And it's 100% because I would say all of my clients, I think one of my clients was a random LinkedIn connection and we just hit it off and, that was great.
Yeah.
Every other client I've worked with has come either through a direct network or like a friend of a friend kind of network connection. And I've tried traditional marketing over the years and it just doesn't work. And I think partly because you're like, whether you're working with startups or whether you're working with, people who have an entrenched business, like
Yeah.
it's so much a part of them that it's really, especially the finance piece, it's
Yeah.
really hard to give that away to somebody who you don't have that trust built up with. And
Yeah.
so I think that when you get to them through a connection, there's an automatic level of trust. And I will say that through all of that, I don't think that maybe once or twice there's been somebody else kind of in the running, but most
Yeah.
times it's the connection makes the connection and you have one conversation and then you start working with them
I
because there's that level of trust built in.
And in fact, I mean, I'll go there. There's masculine and feminine, but I think certainly being women, I put a higher emphasis on relationship building and just knowing the person. And so there's a lot of, I mean, in traditional marketing, there's the know, like, and trust. And so if you're going into a completely different world, say something that you've never done in your past through your corporate job, there certainly is, like, you got to build that brand, like if you're creating a product, for instance, launching a new product, there is the know, you got to build it through that. But to your point, there is an underestimation of you've already built that know, like, and trust. Like people that are in your world, you're there already. And being able to work with someone and not having to vet them, but just the comfort that comes with already knowing somebody and having that relationship, because especially in the startup, smaller business, even medium-sized businesses, a lot of it, finance is uncomfortable for people, and it hits a specific, like a shame sometimes, especially if your business isn't making the money you thought. We already talked about it for our own self, like, what is success and that type of stuff. So it hits that. And I think more often than not, it's as much your functional knowledge as the ability to come in and really be like a sounding board and a partner and someone that someone trusts, which I always tried to overcomplicate the functional side coming from a bigger business, that there's like a lot of nuances and just red tape that you've got to, like, you do a bunch of different analysis, especially in the finance side, to smaller businesses or even startups like that size. It is much less formal and like complex, and it's much more about, let's have a conversation about it, what makes sense, let's quick to action, let's adjust from there and just chat about it. Is that true in your side as well?
Yes, absolutely. And I think just one thing, going back to the trust factor, a lot of times as a fractional CFO, whether it's for a startup or a more established business, you kind of toe this line of between the business finances and the founders finances, right?
Yeah.
And so that is, understanding how to work in that way and have that, um, just that information that they're providing you with. And it is definitely something that is, it requires this higher level of trust. But I think also one of the things that I've learned is not making things, like you were saying, not making things overly complicated, right? And, breaking it down. And a lot of times small businesses that we're working with don't need all of the metrics and systems and processes and all of that the large multinational corporations do, but they do need consistency, and they do need good data, and they do need ways to understand that data that can help them make decisions.
Yeah.
Right. So they might not need the intricate like data management system or whatever, but they need strong financials. They need strong sales data, customer data, and a way to kind of pull that all together that tells a story of where the business is going.
I love that. And that there's two break-offs, two things that I want to, but the first one is when you talk about that and what the businesses really need. I think first is when people think fractional CFO, whether you're interested in following that route or a small business, they think, I'm not at the point where I need what a lot of people think of as CFOs for like a public company. Like, I need that level of experience. I've never been a CFO before. Or if you're the small business, you think like, I'm not that big, I don't know, $5 million in revenue, which is great. But like, you're thinking, do I really need a CFO? Am I at that level? Can you I think it's a different mindset, and that is not like what people envision it is, and what's really needed or what you really need to bring to the business is very different. Have you seen that? Have you heard others kind of, that terminology, I think, turns people off to what really is being delivered, at least what you've done with startups and your clients?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of different ways to look at it. And I know, we've talked about this before, and there's like a lot when you hear fractional CFO, you really have to understand, okay, so what does that person mean when they
Yes.
say fractional CFO? Because everybody does it a little bit differently. And there everybody needs to have clean books, right? So whether you have a bookkeeper or, an admin that's running your QuickBooks or, whatever it is to just get the numbers right and making sure that you're keeping on track of things. That's important. But then what the CFO does, and whether it's, 2 hours a month or 2 hours a day, they're going to help you take that data and
Yeah.
they're going to help you figure out, where do you want to go next? How is that data going to help you achieve your business goals? If you don't know what your business goals are, maybe they're going to help you
Yeah.
in a conversation to just be that sounding board to refine the business goals and
Yeah.
figure out what do you need. Like, if you want to sell your company in 3 years, what are the things you need to be putting in place today to make sure that you have the right systems, processes, infrastructure to make it a sellable venture? Because I
Yeah.
think so much of what happens is people put their heart and soul into building their businesses, but it's not actually a sellable thing because it's so much based on the founder. And when the
Yeah.
founder leaves, does the business have value or does it just go away? And
Yeah.
so those are all of the kinds of things that a CFO can help you think through,
Yeah.
as opposed to a bookkeeper or controller.
Yeah.
Or, like, even if you think you're too small for a CFO, like, maybe it's 2 hours a quarter. Like, you just want to check in and have that, chat about what you're trying to achieve and
Yeah.
how you're doing, and have somebody else validate that for you.
I always say, I think the business path that I see a lot is you start out as a bootstrapped, or maybe you get investor led, but you like a solopreneur. You you're doing what you need to do. Maybe you bring in some service providers, like you're paying, like
Hmm.
like we talked about an EA or a virtual assistant, however you may bring on. You're maybe bringing on like a service around, like you said, bookkeeping, but it's somebody who's doing a very specific thing. And maybe you have some hourly employees if you're like a Main Street business, or, like again, a service provider, like landscaping company. You get to a point in your growth where you need somebody. It's just kind of in your head. You don't really have a lot of people to bounce your ideas off of. You need some people that are forward thinking, that are thinking about where you're going to drive your business, whether it's finance, but also there's marketing professionals out there. It depends on
Hmm.
what is the area. And that's where I always think you're not ready to bring someone on, because that's a big jump, especially with us
Yeah.
thinking about from a financial investment standpoint, especially when you're not sure if you're seasonal, like, can I really afford this? The
Hmm.
next level is oftentimes that fractional thing. Okay, I know I want somebody to help me think about this strategically. I know I need to kind of get to this X stage that I want to get to in my business. Can I bring someone on a sliver of the time?
Hmm.
And on that, can you talk about a little bit? I think fractional in and of itself is a big question. I think people
Hmm.
understand part-time. That's used a lot. People understand consulting. How would you define fractional for either businesses that are thinking about it, but also individuals? Like, I think that's a somewhat of a new term for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think it is kind of part-time slash consulting, right? It's
Yep.
a mix
Yep.
of all of those, right? But when I think of consulting, I think of somebody who comes in for a specific time frame or a specific task, and then they leave.
Yeah.
When I think of part-time, I think of more, like you were saying, hourly workers, like
Yeah.
people who are just coming in, they're doing their job, their tasks, whatever, and then they're going home at the end of the day. Whereas if I think of a fractional executive, I think that's the key term, is the executive. So you're
Yeah.
getting that higher level thought process, whether that's in a fractional CFO, chief marketing officer, chief HR officer, you're getting that higher level strategic thinking in that subject area for only a fraction of the cost and a fraction
Yeah.
of the time.
Yeah.
Right. And, you're running your small business. You don't have time to sit around and listen to your CFO all the time. Right. You just want to get in, understand what you have to do, and then go and implement that
Yep.
decision.
Yep.
And so that's why I think a fractional person brings that higher level expertise, but also doesn't take up your time. You don't have to manage them. You don't have to do,
Yeah.
performance reviews. You don't have to do
Yeah.
bonuses,
Yeah. Paying
like
payroll
all of that
taxes. They're
stuff.
not
Hmm.
like you have to, they're self-managed,
Hmm.
uh, preferably, ideally, individual that can come in and really help you get to whatever that next level is that
Hmm.
you want to get to. And I like to, because
Exactly.
the way I think about part-time too is historically that was usually somebody who only worked for one company, but just in a diminished capacity,
Reduced. Yeah.
part-time. Yeah. A reduced
Yeah.
capacity is a better term. Um, Fractional, I think exactly like you said, executive, but I think it also be just like a senior level, like a professional level, whether it's a director in a company, a vice president, a senior. You don't have to have left as a C-suite professional that can come in. And what I want to talk about, and this has been a learning for me too, is as the fractional employee, you really can define it any number of ways, meaning I've seen some people define fractional in terms of their time. I'm only going to work with certain companies, 1 hour, 2 hours a week or 2 hours a day, depending on what your own specific goals are. But also fractional in terms of a CFO and we keep using CFO, but plug in a different function.
Right.
A CFO at a public company has this traditional breadth of overview that they need to do.
Hmm.
A smaller business obviously doesn't have all of that. So I've seen some fractional CFOs that are very specific, as you are, like in startups, but dealing with investors. And I've seen others that are dealing specifically in, say, the construction space and how do we get a loan for, you
Hmm.
can narrow down the breadth of what a person does and say, this is very specifically what my business needs. And the flip side is the individual can say, I didn't like all this about my job. I had to do all this other stuff, but I really
Right.
enjoyed this one aspect. And there are so many businesses that need just that one aspect
Hmm.
for you to
Yeah.
help them with. Do you agree with that? And that's kind of how you've navigated it as well as since you've left and
Yeah, and I think so for me personally, the way that I typically approach it is more of the like, how much time am I spending with you over a given week? And
yeah,
if that means, 1 week we're applying for an SBA loan and the next week we're talking to a potential investor, or, the next week we're doing strategic planning and a forward-looking forecast. Like, it's all of the things, but
yeah,
it's like, we have to prioritize, right, what we need to do because it's only for a defined amount of time over the
yeah,
course of a week or a month. I think for me that works really well because then I understand the full picture of the business and everything that's going on. But I like your distinction that says, okay, if there's, you can actually break it up task wise as well, or subject area as well, right? Like, okay, if I'm a fractional CFO here, then I'm only going to focus on, managing investors and
yeah,
I'm not going to worry about the day to day, like bookkeeping, forecasting,
yeah,
all of that. I'm just going to manage the investors. And so I think that works just as well. I think getting into whenever I take on a new client, the first conversation is always, what do you have today
yeah.
and what do you think you need? Like, what are you
Mm,
looking for? Because
hmm.
making sure that there's that alignment between what I can provide and what you're looking for. And sometimes, you know, when they say what they are looking for, when I understand more about the business, I'm saying, actually, like you don't need this piece, but you need this piece over here. And they're like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. And sometimes we get into it and we start in one place and then
Yep.
over time kind of morph into doing other things because as the business grows and changes, the needs change, right?
Yeah.
And so I think for me, the most important thing is just understanding as the client, what do you think you need? What do
Yeah.
you have today? What's not working about what you have today and that you're looking to add this extra resource?
I love that. How did you, for that, when you have these conversations, did you always, we talked about how you got your first couple of clients. You
Mhm.
focus a lot on startups, like you said, that's kind of your
Mhm.
area and your niche right now. Was that purposeful? Or was that just kind of the need where you found the need? Do you enjoy that more than other businesses? How did you kind of navigate that when you first, or how to get to where you are now?
Yeah, I think it's just those are the people that found me. through my network.
Yeah.
And, like I said, I really enjoy working with founders in early stage because I think, they are the people that really they might not have ever run a business before. And
Yeah.
so this is where a lot of our expertise from working in a large corporation and helping to set up, the infrastructure of
Yeah.
things can come into play. But I like working with my more established clients too. There's just different problems to solve, right? Like,
Yeah.
so, it's growth and hiring and, are we redoing the product set? Are we redoing the brand? Are we marketing to the right target customer? And they're all, you get similar issues with startups, but I think
Yeah.
sometimes startups are much more tactical as opposed to the strategy piece that you can
Yeah.
get with
Yeah.
the more established companies.
Has there been anything that's been most surprising to you since making the jump and switching over? Like, I always say entrepreneurship for me has been the biggest personal development, unbeknownst to me, of what I
Hmm.
didn't know that I loved. And I know a lot of things I feel like will come to you and you can decide, like you said, these clients that kind of, and then you found that you love that. I've found sometimes I've had some clients that I found myself in old patterns of overworking
Hmm.
and no boundaries and actually not enjoying what I was doing. And that was a real, like, I had to switch my brain around, a mindset shift around that's not failure. And that doesn't mean you're never going to be happy. It just means, okay, this is not the type of client. Like, I have that ownership now where I never did before, but it took me a while to realize that. And
Hmm.
so curious for you, if through this journey, you said 8 years now, like, what has been kind of some of the biggest surprises or learnings about yourself going through this?
Yeah. I think e- exactly what you were talking about is that I tend to like, if I get into a problem, like I want to take it to the end, no matter how long
Yeah.
it takes to get there. Right. And
Yeah.
so, setting those boundaries, and I try and be super flexible with my clients, and I don't take on a ton of clients all at once because I have more of this strategic advisor model than
Yeah.
some fractional CFOs, which are just a few hours a month and really focused on the finances aspect of things.
Yeah.
And so I like to be flexible to say, like, hey, if you have a leadership meeting that goes for 3 days this week, like you can get 3 days this week. It might mean that next week or, last week, maybe I didn't spend
Yeah.
as much time and that's okay. But
Yeah.
I tend to not actually do, like, I'll still spend as much time.
Yes.
And so it's really the boundaries and making sure
Yeah.
that I'm setting the right boundaries for
Have you always
myself.
known? I think it took me a while I mean, in the simplest terms, is figure out how I worked best. But you talk about because you're more of an advisory capacity in the higher level, like the strategic work,
Hmm.
not taking as many clients on because you want to get to know them deeply and all that stuff. Did you always know your limits around that? And like, for instance, for me, it took me a while also to realize, like, I do my best, like meetings probably in the afternoons I do best because I do deep thought work if I have to do any of the like
Hmm.
strategic stuff like in the mornings. And ideally, if I could have my Monday to kind of work on the business and not in the business, like how to structure my weeks and what was really important to me, as opposed to just, I'll take everyone that needs business to say yes to it because revenue should be my driver, versus how do I really want my business to structure?
Hmm.
Were you always clear about that? Or has that kind of been a path for you as well, as like, this is what I'm looking for, whether it's number of clients or revenue or flexibility or whatever? And has that changed since you've,
Yeah, I think it's constantly sort of ebbing and flowing,
yeah,
right? And there's definitely times where I feel like, gosh, like maybe I overcommitted myself. And then there are other times where, just through the normal sort of cycle of things, like I'm like, oh, well, maybe I get out there and do some more networking because
yeah,
I can see the path where like I need to generate more revenue for later in the year.
yeah,
Um, and I do try and carve out time where I can think about what are the things that I need to do and how do I want to manage and grow my business.
yeah,
But it is hard. There's definitely times where I get so busy that goes on the back burner, right? And then there's
yeah.
other times where I'm like, oh, I actually have a lot of time to sit and do this, and what do I need to do, and how can I kind of get out there?
Yeah, I mean, that's been for me one of the biggest, I guess, pros and cons. Actually, pros is the ability to adjust my day based on how I'm feeling and what I need and what the client needs, and not necessarily the other way around, what the business needs, and I need to respond to that. But the other side is then trying to get rid of that idea of constant like hustle culture and having to always do that and part of that is valuing yourself and what you're bringing. That's a whole nother thing around
Yeah.
pricing and how do you, like, that's a whole
Right.
thing, which has been hard for me too. And talk about shame, because I am in finance and I feel like I should know this is what your value is, but not feeling, again, in my corporate job, and not to use that as an example, but I mean, you would work nights and weekends for the same amount, right? So it was almost
Mhm.
like proving yourself, and the better you were, the more work you did. So it just reinforces kind of this constant busyness,
Yeah.
which then proves that you're ready for, a big more, versus really believing that there is so much value in what you're providing. And it's not because of the hours, it's because of the knowledge that you've built up over the past however many years that is really, really valuable, especially because we see so many cuts in corporate. So I think it minimizes like, oh, I don't know if I'm, like, do I have a
Right.
lot of value? If you were one of the recent layoffs, no issue, not because of anything you've done, but because of the market and stuff. So thinking that that is really valuable is the hours, when you provide a small business owner with a clear path forward and they can really see what they're doing right, maybe what they want to change. They feel it's like this ease that is worth
Mhm.
so much to
Yeah.
them.
Yep.
And not equating that to how many hours did you spend doing that versus I've built this 20-year pathway of knowledge that I can bring. And
Mhm.
that is really
Mhm.
valuable in and of itself.
Yeah.
And so I think exactly what you're saying too is just the ability, for me at least, it's been the ability to try and realize that and truly believe that, but then lean into
Mhm.
that has been one of the biggest unlocks, is being able to control my week a little bit more and my days, especially with kids
Mhm.
at home. And to add on to that, which I know you have kids now, a little older than mine, but
Mhm.
to adjust based on what your needs are in that season. And it is
Yeah.
okay in one season to say, especially coming off the summer here, of I'm not going to be able to do as much, but know that in the fall or the spring or when they're older or younger, whatever it may be, I can lean in heavily to that. And just allowing that has been one of the biggest benefits, I'd say, to making the switch for me.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's huge. And, what I will say is that, I'm not personally making as much money as I made, in a corporate environment when you take everything into account.
Yeah.
But the flexibility and um, my ability to choose, you know, my daughter was visiting last week. She doesn't live here anymore. And I just blocked my calendar and people, if something came up, people knew I was available, but I wasn't setting any
Yeah.
meetings and I wasn't loading up my day with, things that I needed to review or work on. And that's just invaluable,
Yeah.
particularly, we're at a different stage than you are with your
Yeah.
kids. But whenever I'm in the same place as her, I want to spend as much time together
Yeah.
as possible because we just don't live in the same state anymore. So
Yeah.
it's a lot fewer moments and opportunities for that. And so that flexibility through, I left corporate when she was a junior in high school. So it was like through senior year in high school, through college, and just getting to, you know, work where I wanted to work. Like if I wanted to
Yeah.
go visit her for a long weekend and, do a couple calls while I was there, like I didn't have to be in an office anywhere. And this was even before COVID, right? I was doing
Yeah.
this. And so it was a lot more flexible and a lot more control over my own time.
I love that. I've said that before, and I know we just talked about, but I just want to like exclamation point on the end of that too, because I talk to a lot of people. Certainly, that's not to minimize financial worries, and I'm glad you
Hmm.
said that was always my idea. Is like, okay, I just got to quickly replace my salary, and
Hmm.
certainly that's a good goal, and some people may need to do that, and you could do that, but what I quickly realized is to the detriment of what? And I didn't want to get there and have the same life that I did before meaning I didn't have control over my calendar and I couldn't just take the day when the kids were sick for me, or, and so I realized redefining what my success was for me, which we talked a little bit before we started recording, was it's so big. And I have to keep reminding myself that, because it's hard to get off that mentality of, what do I really need? And I'm lucky to have a husband who has a corporate job. He's my bond. I say it, I'm the stock, right? I'm the
Mhm.
risky one that can go up
Right.
and down. And he's like kind of as much as a corporate job can be
Yeah.
safe anymore.
Stable.
But
Yeah.
yeah, right. But so I'm lucky to have that. But I had to look at like, what do we really need in our life? And actually what we need and what I need is to be able to be there for the kids more and
Mhm.
to fill my own cup a little more, so I'm not short with everyone. And this allows that. So redefining then, how much do I actually need to make based on what our real needs are versus what this aspirational, like down the road just to prove that I'm successful, and then down the road to retire with what, versus enjoying my life now. So that has been this constant redefining of what does that look like for me. And I just to reiterate what you said too, because now I always said, you can always go back.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You can always go back. I think
Mhm.
there's always a need. There was this fear of like, if I were to leave corporate, you're like, how do you show that gap? I'm like, nowadays there is so much in, like, you can say that you've learned in the gap. But what has changed for me personally is now 4 years on this road, I'm like, I myself can't imagine going back because of what I've gained in terms of the flexibility and the
Mhm.
ability to just like work with the people I love and the clients that I love, and be able to lean into the type of work that I like doing. So it's my own hindrance now. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh gosh, I can't imagine going back. But all that to say, exactly, it's this, I think it's much broader, and making the decision is not always easy, but I think it's much broader than just replacing your salary or what,
Yeah.
what is the financials. If you look at your full life and what you really want, like, you got to
Exactly.
assess
And
it.
the other thing that I love, this term that I've heard is like this portfolio career, right? Like
Yeah.
I don't just do fractional CFO, right? I am an active real estate investor, and I'm involved with a private equity firm, and I sit on a couple of boards. And so, you know, yes, the CFO stuff, consulting stuff does not replace my corporate salary, but there's a time to now do these other things that, um, also make money and
Yeah.
also fill me up in different ways.
I thank you for saying that. Thank you so much, because that's also kind of this one path. And I love the multi hyphen. I don't know what it would be. Yeah. But like,
Yeah.
because I think a couple things that does for me in hearing that is, you don't have to define what it is when you leave and have it be the one thing. It is a
Mhm.
evolution of following the breadcrumbs. And when you allow yourself to open up that you can do multiple things, whether it's a hobby and not revenue generating, or it is bringing in money, but there is so much more out there that, one, it brings greater happiness because you're able to kind of check the boxes a lot of your different interests. But two, if one of those isn't perfect, which nothing ever is, but it allows you to kind of spread out the highs and lows of any single thing. I feel like, because you're like,
Mhm.
I got all these other things working, or
Yeah.
this thing, I don't have as many clients, but I'm going to lean into this because I love it. Or I had a bad meeting for here, but oh my God, I'm about to jump into this great thing. So it kind of helps normalize instead of all of it being about the one thing. And if it's bad,
Yeah.
then it's like, it kind of controls your whole life or all of your
Mhm.
emotions there. So thank you for mentioning that. I think that's a
Yeah.
huge, huge benefit, and things that more people should be doing and allowed to do.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Because it's so hard when you're just working for one company and it takes up all your time, and then you have all these restrictions like, can I do this stuff outside of
yes,
work? I'm not really sure because I'm under contract or have some, you know, mm, I don't know, restrictions on what I can do.
yes, yes. There's both the actual legal blocks that you're not allowed to, but
Mhm.
then also the mental block of like, even if it's a weeknight or a weekend, like whatever
Yeah.
there's no real defined hours with corporate anymore, especially if you're a salary employee. So doing something else, like, some people will sit on boards, but even that you have to like get approval, a nonprofit board. So
Yeah.
to your
Mhm.
point, it's like really hard in the mental block to be like, I'm going to carve out different times. So this just allows a real nice blending. And I think the more you blend different business pursuits, it normalizes the ability to blend your personal life too, which is for me
Yeah.
in corporate, it was really trying to keep them separate just because, oh, my kids are here. I want to try not. And this is just a real blending of like, here's who I am overall,
Yeah.
and I need to blend
Well,
everything.
and I think the other thing too that I think about with that, and I know I'm closer to retirement age than you are, but like when you're working in a corporate career, right? You're sort of all in, and then the day after you retire, like, what are you going to do? You have to
Yeah.
start all over, right? And I know retirement is very different now than maybe when our parents and grandparents were retiring, right? Where like you can continue to do things throughout your retirement. And
Yeah.
the real estate investing and sitting on boards, like those are things that I could see doing,
Yeah.
for a very long time. And, both to keep myself interested and active and engaged in things, but also to generate some income. Whereas if you are in a corporate job the whole time and you don't have the opportunity or the time or the headspace to set up those other things,
Yeah.
then you're starting from scratch at that later point in time.
So good. You're right. And I think, yeah, retirement has shifted or I want to love what I'm doing so that I don't want to just stop it at the end. And to your
Mhm,
point, like having that leeway to like transition into other things or start it earlier and build that baseline because it does take time, both your own learnings, but also just to grow anything
mhm.
else.
Yeah.
Um, I love that. So Cheryl, thank you, by the way, for being on, for
Yes.
sharing your knowledge. I'm grateful that we met in our paths crossed because like I said at the beginning, I feel like finding your community, if you're thinking about doing something like this, if you have left, like we specifically are in a community for fractional CFOs, but there's so
Mhm,
much else out there. And I think that's just been a big unlock when you're riding the highs and lows, but also just tactically, like there are so many specific software, what the world and the market, especially with AI, is coming to. There are so many things that are very specific that can help you operationally and allow this and finding the community of people that can talk through the specifics of how do you deliver the service and how do you price it and how do you create your contract and all that operational stuff has been huge. So I'm
yeah.
grateful that we have paths. Cross the paths. So thank you for being on here, sharing your story. If anyone's listening and is interested in hearing more, reaching out to you, working with you, how can they find you? Talk us through social media, website. Where can they go?
Yeah, I think the easiest place is website is pillar1cfo.com. So it's pillar, Pillar, 1one.com. Or you can reach me at Cheryl at pillar1cfo.com.
Perfect. I will put all that in the show notes. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate you
Thank
being
you.
on.
This has
Always
been
such
such a
a
great
joy.
conversation.
I know. We'll have to do this again soon.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Scale with Clarity. If it sparked something for you and you're wondering what your next step might look like outside of corporate, I created a free tool called the Clarity Compass. It's designed to help you uncover your strengths and start mapping what an aligned business could look like. You can download it at the link in the show notes. And if you'd like more personalized support, I also offer one-on-one coaching to help you design and build a solopreneur path that fits your life. And until next time, thanks so much for listening. Be sure to tune back in for more stories and conversations that I hope inspire and guide you on your own journey.